you're watching this video because you've at least self-identified and have the self-awareness to understand that you get defensive sometimes, which is great because that's honestly the first part we need to all be on the same page about. So let's say that there's a scenario where someone says something or does something to you and you immediately are triggered, right? What do you do? What do you do in this exact scenario when your body has put a GPS pin in moments like this and they're telling you to be defensive? Well, the first step is to pause. Boom. Right there, pause, as if the world goes in slow motion and figure out what's going on right now. That pause is actually huge because the pause allows your brain to think. Here's a fun, nerdy fact for you. It takes 400 milliseconds for our brain to form a thought. And so whenever you give even the slightest pause, you're helping your body understand, well, hang on now. We might not need to be up in arms about this whole scenario. And so the second step after pausing is thinking through, why am I defensive? Now, for some of you, you might have done some deep work on this and you realize that there's an actual event that you can tie you being defensive to. Like a game-changing moment in your life where you realized, I have been in fight or flight ever since this point. And for me, honestly, it comes from a bullying experience that I faced in high school. I was bullied for 18 months straight. I've actually done a podcast episode on it a couple years ago, sharing that whole story, but of course I'm not going to go into it now. The point is, I was able to identify what the actual beginning part of where I started becoming defensive was. And I think that's important because when you can point to the origin, you're able to dig at the root of it and help redirect yourself from there. And I've realized that whenever my body's getting defensive, it's almost putting me in this fist up position. Like, all right, we got to fight. Fight or flight. Mine is literally fight and fight some more. That's the posture that I tend to stay in these moments. And I can trace it back to two things that make me get defensive. Being misunderstood or being mischaracterized. Those are things that I absolutely hate. And the worst part about it is they're out of my control. I cannot make someone think a certain way about me. All I can do is focus on what I can control. And so maybe you can relate because maybe somebody says something to you and your brain interprets it as a remark where you're thinking, they're not on my team. How did you do that to me? Your brain's lighting up, being like, oh, they're out to get us. We must fight now. When in reality, it's someone saying something to you who actually loves you and is definitely on your team. And so before you even get to the place of being defensive, your body starts alerting you. Now that could look different to different people. Here's what my brain does when I'm getting defensive. As I can feel that escalation happening, my heart rate is getting quicker. My ears and my face get hotter, get warmer for sure. And my breathing starts to get quicker. And also my voice starts to escalate. I start to get much louder, almost to the point where I'm going to be screaming if I don't calm it down soon. And that, recognizing what's happening in your body, is critical because that's where you have to intervene and start taking actions on what to do next. So let's say that you're feeling all of these things, but you want to proceed anyways to try and figure this out. Now I say that because we're going to learn some techniques later on in the video, which can include taking a 20-minute break or certain things like that that can help your body get back to normal homeostasis. But let's just say for this example, you want to proceed. So the next step after you've paused, after you're figuring out why am I getting defensive right now? Step 3 is find an emotion that you're feeling. Now, you might have just heard that and you're like, that's so stupid. I don't want to find an emotion. What are we, 5? I don't know. Some people really hate feelings and emotions because they're thinking, I'm not really a feelings person. Well, there's actually this beautiful tool called the emotions wheel, which I didn't realize how impactful it would be until I started using it. It has over 100 emotions in it to help you use to identify, okay, this is actually what I'm feeling right now. And so that's important to use because you might not have an emotion wheel on you, but you want to learn to identify what you're feeling inside. Because when you use a statement like, I feel upset by a comment you made, that actually does something amazing in the conversation because you're redirecting it. And I'll explain that next. But some people get this step wrong. I've been guilty of that a lot of times. I just would use an I feel statement to mask anything rude that I wanted to say. For instance, I could say something, I feel like you're being rude. That's not a feeling. I don't feel anything. What I'm trying to pretend I'm not saying is you're being really rude right now. But that's not going to help the conversation at all. So it truly needs to be an I feel, insert emotion, personalize it. You're talking about yourself. You're not pointing a finger. I feel hurt. I feel sad. I feel frustrated, etc. When you use these I feel statements, you're stating how it makes you feel and redirecting it to test the assumption, which is the next step in this. Because by stating how you feel, it immediately keeps the conversation focused on getting to an actual resolution and not pointing fingers and the blame game and all the craziness that could ensue otherwise. And so the undercurrent of defensiveness, especially for me, has been making assumptions on my own. And so step 4 is test the assumption. Was their intention to hurt me? Yes, no, maybe so. But it's okay. I don't actually get to answer that for myself. Testing the assumption means bringing it to that other person's attention. So let's play this out. Let's say that someone said something that felt like an offhanded, rude comment. What I would normally do if I was getting super defensive is, why would you say that to me? Well, obviously that's not going to go well. My heart rate, my tone, everything just skyrocketed up, putting the other person back into a defensive posture equally. What I could say instead is, hey, that really sounded kind of mean. Did you mean to say a comment that would hurt my feelings? Now, that sounds so silly and so vulnerable, and that's what it is. But immediately, just hearing that, my body calmed down, even though I was the one saying it, because I'm giving someone the room and the space to say, oh my gosh, no, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to come across like that at all. And testing the assumption is always to your benefit, because if we don't get that up and out of our body and question those thoughts, people can really turn into bad guys. And you can easily fall into a trap of thinking the entire world is against you unless you have the courage and the vulnerability to ask. And people that love you are actually going to be really grateful that you asked them and allowed them to correct or clarify what they said, what they did, what they meant. And right here, I just want to talk about assumption journaling. I spoke about it in the last episode, but it's been a huge help to me. Dr. John Deloney speaks about it in his show, where basically it's this concept that every time you have this thought that's an assumption that you're making, you have to write down the assumption and test it. Is this true? If the person isn't actually there with you, or you don't have the opportunity to ask them directly, then you can't believe that it is. You can create scenarios in your mind that are negative, and you can also create scenarios that are positive. For instance, let's say my best friend doesn't text me back for a whole day. And I'm like, oh my God, does she hate me? Oh my God, does she hate me? I'm writing it down. Then when you put it on paper, you're like, whoa, that's kind of crazy. Just because she didn't text you back. No, maybe she's just busy. Or maybe she forgot. Maybe it was one of those times where she looked at her phone, mentally responded, but forgot to respond in person. So assumption journaling is a great exercise for that. So basically, to recap these steps of someone says something or someone does something and you're immediately ready to go crazy and defend yourself. Step 1, pause. Step 2, figure out, why am I getting defensive right now? Step 3, find an emotion you're feeling and then use an I feel statement to vulnerably state what you're feeling. Then step 4, test that assumption. And oftentimes step 3 and 4 can be coupled together. And I feel this, was that what your intention? something like that. That's how it can work for you. So I hope that gives you a good framework to help you at least immediately start understanding how to become less defensive in scenarios where you normally would become defensive.